introducing you to this newer show that we put together called the Enlightened Passenger. The idea behind the show is simply asking guests what they would tell a stranger on a plane if they were sitting next to them and the stranger asked them for advice.
The scenery is passing very fast, but the seer is constant. The one who's seeing is the same.
Let me appreciate you for asking a question that I haven't been asked after 2,500 or so interviews over the years.
You have to drop the ego, which is everyone's greatest obstacle.
In 2008, Grant and I had been married for 4 years. I was pregnant with my first child. The economy was collapsing, and we were on the verge of losing everything financially.
So it's so exciting, Mitzi Perdue, to have you back again. We've had you on before, and I'm so excited to bring you back. This is a different sort of show than we usually do, but it's still a very conversational style show. It just builds up to one question that I like to ask each guest, but I don't want to jump too far ahead. So Mitzi, first and foremost, the last time we talked to you, you were definitely doing a lot of good work in the world. You were, I know, championing some different causes. So perhaps I'll start there and say, can you tell us sort of what's all new and what's all happened since?
All right. I'm still very involved with everything that I could do to combat human trafficking. And generally that's in the form of fundraising, but also awareness. But the most amazing thing happened because of that. I wrote an article in Psychology Today interviewing a guy whose specialty is combating human trafficking, and he was on the border of Ukraine. Well, I wrote a story about it, and guess what? The man who's in charge of the Kyiv region in Ukraine, his master's thesis was on human trafficking, and he saw the article I wrote for Psychology Today. I had a Zoom call with him, and he invited me to see for myself what I had written about. Amazing?
Very amazing. And so does that, so the picture that's behind you, is that, I mean, I assume that's related to what happened as a result of that story then?
Yeah, something like a week later, I was in Ukraine, guest of the Ukrainian government. And boy, it left me with the strongest feeling that the Ukrainians are up against something so awful, and yet they still keep their spirits up and they're still fighting. But I got to see, I think the worst that I saw was a mass grave in Bucha. Mm-hmm. Here's what the Russians did. Their first, or at least one of the first things that they did in every place that they ever captured or attacked was they destroyed the police departments. And why were they doing that? Yeah, it's kind of, you don't think about it. I certainly never thought about it. But they do it because one of the best ways of demoralizing people is not only having them attacked by invaders from the outside, but if your police function is gone and they emptied the prisons, which they did, then you're attacked both by people from inside and outside, and there's nobody to call if you're being robbed or your daughter raped or whatever, because with the police stations knocked out, including their communications and their police vehicles, it's designed very deliberately. It's a psyop to demoralize the population.
Wow. And so I guess what would you say would be, and I know you shared even a couple already, but what would you say would be the biggest takeaway that you had from the experience?
Let me make it two, because they're two great big ones. The first one is, I got invited to Ukraine because, according to General Nebitov, that's the guy who's the head of the regional police, the Western press is covering refugees, they're covering battles, but they're not covering one of these internal things that is designed to just shake the confidence and the morale of a whole population. And they're doing such wonderful things, and they're so important. And I want to circle back to some of the important things that police do that you never think of. But you did ask me for two takeaways, or at least I think you did, and if you didn't, I wish you had. The biggest takeaway was and this is something I think you're never going to hear in anybody else's podcast ever, ever, ever. I have a reason for thinking that the Ukrainians will win. And it involves roses, breadcrumbs, and fingernail polish. Now, I'm trying to get you to wonder what those three things have to do with each other. But I noticed something that I took to be just surprising and amazing. And that is, wherever I went, I was noticing that the Ukrainian women that I either met or saw, I think 90% of them were wearing beautiful fingernail polish. And I just held my fingernails up, and I'm not wearing fingernail polish, but what I got to see was some of the most modern fingernail polish I've ever seen, like different colors or the color of their flag. And I'm thinking, there's a war going on. This is a puzzle. Well, a couple of days after I left England, I was having lunch with one of the world's experts. He's a sociologist and a professor of this, of like war and morale. And I told him how puzzled I was that in the midst of all this despair and horror and discouragement, that women were hugely wearing fingernail polish. And yet in neighboring Poland, which I visited after Ukraine, they weren't. And he had an explanation. He said, and he told me a story, and I hope I'm not monologuing too long.
Oh, no, please continue.
There were people who survived the death camps by doing things like what I'm about to describe. There was a prisoner who started off at 200 pounds. By the time he was saved, he weighed 130 pounds. But even when he was starving to death, he would save little crumbs from the meager food allowance he got, and he'd leave it on the window ledge. And every day a bird would come and visit with him, eating the breadcrumbs. And this guy said that moment of beauty and just remembering a normal life was what gave him the will to live and to keep on, not giving up. Well, the professor told me that when women do things like wear nail polish, it's a great big giant iti nahui, which is Ukrainian for Putin to do something that's anatomically impossible to himself. In other words, it's a very rude statement. But this is an FU gesture to retain beauty and caring. And that led to another example of it. I was visiting a police station 12 miles from the border of Belarus, where the Russians invaded from. And the police station I was visiting, I want you to imagine that you're in a building. The building might be the size of a tennis court. It's a police station, but it was so bombed out that whatever explosive they used, it had turned the whole building into like a furnace. And you're inside the building, and there's a shell of the building, but there are no floors, there are no partitions, no furniture, no desks, just rubble. It's sort of a hellscape. But the head of the police station walked with me maybe 20 or 30 yards away from this bombed out building, and there was a rose garden. And there were probably 25 rose bushes, beautiful, large, healthy, gorgeous, inspirational roses. And I figured out, and this is why I think that the Ukrainians are going to win, because like that prisoner in World War II who didn't give up because he had the beauty of a wild bird, the Ukrainians that I saw, they keep their morale. They have little moments of beauty and civilization that they can hang on to. And so I walked away with the conviction that whatever Putin's doing, he hasn't destroyed their spirit. They're still clinging to beauty and a remembrance of normalcy and what they're fighting for.
Wow, amazing. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and it's wild because it's a complete shift of gears. But I'm so glad I went in that direction. Oh, and there's another photo from your experience.
Yeah, this is the building where outside is the rose garden.
Oh, wow.
But shift away. I'm up for it.
No, it's yeah. So I was gonna say, I'm glad I went there though, because we so need to hear that kind of hope, and obviously that you see a very positive outcome in terms of this eventually being resolved. So I think for somebody that sort of got a chance to be on the ground level, it's good to hear those kind of even just that whole idea of how those all connected, those three elements. So I'm glad you shared that. And then to switch gears quite a bit, I also seen since we last chatted that the person that connected us, Mark Victor Hansen of Chicken Soup for the Soul, I happened to note that and see that you ended up writing a book about Mark Victor Hansen. Did I see that correctly?
Biography. Tell me something. You were frozen for a moment. Was mine?
For just a mega second. Just a second.
Perfect. I mean, perfect that it was only a megasecond. Yeah, I've written this book, and it just won the Literary Titan Award for nonfiction. Woohoo! And then there's an online book club, which I think has 2 million members, and it was the chairman's choice for August, and it was also Book of the Day for August. So, yeah, some people are liking it.
Wow. Do you mind? I'm curious now because I'm a big fan of book clubs. Do you recall the name of that book club? Because I'm always curious about new book clubs.
Yeah, it's simply called. Actually, it's the neatest premise. It's the online book club, and it's a showcase for new authors. But you can get the book free if you'll review it, and so it's just a wonderful guide of. What's out there and what's new and what's fresh, and it's kind of, as far as I can tell, the books are reviewed sort of like Amazon reviews, and I think you can get a really good feel for what's neat. And
that's awesome.
They say that if percentage wise, if you get 100 people who say I like this book and I'd read it and I'd recommend to others, if you get even 1%, you're way ahead of the game. If you you just aced it. 37% of people said that they liked my book and they'd recommend it to others.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Well, first of all, big congrats. And secondly, what I think I probably know, but I'd rather hear from you. What was the catalyst to drive you to want to write a book about Mark's life and Mark's story, and obviously all the lessons that we can learn from Mark? I mean, what sort of drove that?
Oh, the answer is fairly simple. I have a purpose in life. I want to increase happiness and decrease misery. And it seems to me one of the ways of doing that is inspiring people to be all they can be. And I thought, I'm 81 years old and proud of it. In my 81 years, I've never come across a person more inspirational than Mark. And I thought if I could have the privilege of writing about him, I could help spread some of his inspirational ideas. And I asked him, and to my absolutely undying delight, I think he looked at some of the things I've written before. He said yes. And I wrote the book in under 3 months, and 18-hour days, which is easy if you don't have a life, which I don't.
That's amazing. And I again, I don't like making assumptions, so I'll ask you, but I think that's probably is that the first book to really examine Mark's life and also what he kind of teaches and what lessons he can impart?
Yeah, it is the first, because I asked him, the way I brought it up was, has anybody ever written a biography of you? And he said, no, never thought of it. And I said, Mark, what would you think of my doing it? And he said yes. And then a little insight into Mark and what he's like. In this book, we agreed ahead of time that I would interview people who aren't fans of his. I would interview people, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And he was fine with that, because he said that, it almost doesn't make sense if you only talk about the good part, because then there's nothing to learn. So I got to write about his going bankrupt, a period in his life where he was suicidal, a failed marriage, all of those things. But in every case, he learned from them and he moved forward. But here's the thing that I found amazing about him. When I had finished the book, 250 pages of it, of people talking to me about him, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I was expecting that he would be like every other person I've ever come across in my life whom I've written about, wanting things changed. He didn't ask me to change a single comma. He just wanted the truth. Is that not cool?
That's so cool, and I think it speaks volumes about Mark as a person and his ability to be vulnerable and like you said, obviously want the truth out there. So
Yeah, I mean, he's the real deal inside and out. I never saw one moment of fakery. I did see, I think it's fair to say that he's over the top enthusiastic, that if there's a scale for enthusiasm, he breaks the scale. But I don't consider that a flaw. I consider that maybe one of the ingredients of what made him able to sell 500 million books.
I love it. Well, and I'm so glad to hear that's happened. And I just discovered it a couple of days ago as I was preparing for this interview. And so, of course, I'm going to be ordering the book right away. But I always like to talk to the author about it before I order. So I'm going to be ordering it right away. Having said that, Mitzi, as we start winding down, here's the kind of the main question I want to ask, and then I have a follow-up question. But the main question I want to ask you, and this, I mean, I don't like to get into too much of the context because maybe it changes the person's answer, but also at the same time, a lot of the listeners will have heard me explain it over and over. So the premise is simply this: the premise of the show, called The Enlightened Passenger, is if a passenger was sitting next to you on a plane, and they asked you, Mitzi, whatever their circumstance is, but I would love some life advice. I would love some advice to help me out based on what you've learned. My question out of that is, what do you think you might tell a passenger if you only had maybe a half hour with them and could only impart some advice to them, whether it's one or two pieces of advice? What do you think you might tell that person?
Okay, I think the first, well, it might be two-part. The first part is, assuming you want to get all you can out of life, plunge in, do it. My own personal motto is ready, fire, aim.
Love that.
I mean, over and over again, the things I've done in my life, not really qualified for, but I'd plunge in and learn to be qualified. The other thing, I'd have three things. I'd recommend out of Mark Victor Hansen, persevere. Because like with Chicken Soup for the Soul that made this guy a multi-millionaire, he was turned down 144 times. He presented the book to publishers, and 144 times they turned him down. So persevere, be relentless, which is the title of my book. And don't be discouraged by failure. Failure is the price you pay for getting further ahead. Because in the act of like giving it your all, whatever it is that you're after, even if you don't get what you were immediately hoping for, the good news is just the act of trying, you're going to learn things, you'll meet people, maybe you'll study. So ready, fire, aim.
I love it. So I said I had a follow-up question. It's kind of a unique question in the sense that it's so close to the original question that somebody might ask, well, didn't you just ask that question? But I have another question I call the time machine question. And the time machine question I've been asking for years. But basically the premise behind the time machine question is, if you could jump into a time machine and go back and talk to a younger Mitzi and could give her one piece of life advice based on what you've learned in the years since, what do you think you might tell her? And I'll add in, Mitzi, it seems like the same question, but of course you might tell yourself something different than you'd tell a different person that you just met on a plane. So my question is, would it be the same advice, or what would you tell a younger Mitzi based on you knowing her life experience?
Okay, I think that I didn't make much of my life at all until age 38. Wow. And I know what held me back. It was fear of failure. I'd done some things in my life, but I'd really wanted to write. I'd really wanted to be a public speaker. I'd really wanted to be in television. Those were my dreams. And I didn't try for them because I could picture the turn down, or the audience that hated me, or I was so afraid of failure that I didn't put myself out there and try. But then at age 38, I decided, the one guaranteed way to fail is not to try. So I redefined failure. Failure for me was not trying for what you wanted, because if you don't try, you're guaranteed to fail. So I guess I wish I had known that at 18 instead of 38.
I love that. And what it also tells us, and I feel like Mark and his former writing partner, Jack Canfield, also echo this, is that you're never too late. Like we get do-overs, and you can create magical things regardless of your age, because, and I might have this wrong, but I feel like memory says to me, like Mark and Jack were both approaching 50 before they finally got the contract for and released Chicken Soup for the Soul. And you'll hear, like, I'm 47 right now. And so I'm looking, saying, well, yeah, I'm going like, if they were able to do all that after the age of 48, then what it does for me is it inspires me to say life is just starting. Versus years ago when you were, I remember my family, like my grandparents, that they would say, oh, you're at 50, it's all kind of just, you've already lived your life. And now we're like, hey, 50 is the new 20. Like if Mark and Jack, like I say, did that at that age, and you hear George Foreman won the world title at 49, and you hear all these things, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm like you say, I'm a baby. Colonel Sanders, when he started KFC at 65. Louise Hay, I think, started Hayos in her 60s. So, I mean, like, it makes you realize, to your point, that it's never too late, and you can create magical things regardless of your age. So I think you starting at 38 was, part of backing that up as well.
Well, actually, can I jump in and add a PS to it?
Yeah.
I'm 81 now, and I'm now officially a war correspondent. Woohoo! An 81-year-old war correspondent. I've never been happier. I love the chance to tell important stories.
That's amazing. So, but that's the point, right? You're 81, and I bet you there's a lot of you that feels, hey, I'm just getting started.
Yeah, as I said, life has never seemed more exciting.
It's amazing. So Mitzi, those are my last official questions. I guess the unofficial question, which I don't want to let you run without asking you, very important question, is how can people learn more? I know on your main website page, the new book, people can order it right from there. But where would you send people if they want to learn more about the work you're doing, the correspondence work you're starting to do a lot of, all that kind of stuff? If they want to learn more about Mitzi or hear about the messages you're sharing, where would you typically send them?
Well, recently I've written, I think it's 4 articles from Ukraine, and I'm still churning them out. The best way to get them that I can think of is just search on Mitzi Perdue. And a whole bunch of what I've been writing recently will come up, and I would love to share it because they're important stories.
Wow, what a great interview with Mitzi Perdue. I hope you enjoyed it. And I just want to share my takeaways. I really struggled with this one to focus on one takeaway because there were 2 things that, first of all, I really resonated with that Mitzi talked about. Like always, I mean, I loved the entire interview. All of her insight was amazing. But 2 things that stuck out to me. One was when she talked about the idea of plunge in and just do it. And the second thing was when she said, failure is the necessary step. I'm paraphrasing here, but failure is the necessary step to achieving that which you want to achieve. And so I love both of these ideas. And of course, the failure side, I really think that we should embrace failure as a society. I think we should want to fail quickly and often so that we can get to the good stuff. And I also believe that we learn as much or more from our failures as we do our successes. So I think we should embrace failure, stop making failure a dirty word. It's not the F word, and to move forward and start embracing it and figure out what can I learn from the failure? How can I look at failure as just another stepping stone to get to where I want to get to? And then, like I say, the other thing that I like that Mitzi talked about is to plunge in and just do it. And I like how she added, even if you're not qualified to do it. Because people often ask me how I get into playing music in clubs or releasing a CD or putting out a music video or performing stand-up comedy at places like Second City. And these aren't meant to be me-ing statements, but just to say I was certainly not qualified for any of these things. Just like speaking at Ivy League universities, I wasn't qualified for that. Speaking on a TEDx stage. I mean, if you want to get to the technicality, like by the time I got to some of those stages, I had put in the time and got the experience and put in, my 10,000 hours, but nobody gave me any kind of certification to say I was allowed to do it or qualified to do it. And so again, I think it does come back down to just plunging in and doing it anyway, and what did she say? Ready, fire, aim. I love that. So again, the takeaway for me, and I hope I can impart this on you, is to plunge in. whatever you're thinking about doing, don't sit around and wait till the timing is perfect, because things will never be perfect. Don't wait until you're qualified, because you may never be qualified, but if you go in and do it, you might become qualified in the eyes of many. And so I would, again, as always, I love to see you take something away that you can use. So I would love to see you just write down, what is it that you don't feel you're qualified to do? And then secondly, how can you go and do it anyway? What are the steps you could take to do it anyway? And then figure out a reward you'll give yourself for taking that action. And then of course, finally, take that action. And as always, we'd love to hear in the comments below what your experience is with this if you go forth and try it anyway. So come back if you are so inclined. I would love to see you come back and share in your comments what your experience is and what you actually did anyway. What did you plunge in and do anyway? Hey everybody, Corey Poirier here. Thanks so much for checking out the latest episode of The Enlightened Passenger. And I want to thank you by giving you a gift. So if you can head over to peopleonplanes.com, again, peopleonplanes.com today, you can actually grab a copy of my Top 10 Insights Guide. Now, when I say my top 10 insights guide, these are the top 10 insights that I've gathered during interviews with some of the world's top thought leaders. So in that insights guide, you're going to find insight by the legendary Les Brown, by Lisa Nichols, by the late Bob Proctor. I believe Jack Canfield's in there as well. And these are, again, the insights that it took me thousands of hours and thousands of interviews to gather. And I put them all together in a top 10 insights guide that I want to gift to you. So if you go over to peopleonplanes.com, and you can grab your free copy. If you scroll down, you'll see where it says grab your top 10 insights guide. And of course, on the website, you'll also find other things like the latest episodes of the podcast itself. So thank you so much for joining us on The Enlightened Passenger. I'm Corey Poirier. Until next time.